So basically, the way that this board is set up, there different audio boards can differ from this, but the way this one is set up is you've got 22 channels, I guess, theoretically, strips like this, right? Mm-hmm. And so each of them are really the same. So when you look at all this, sometimes it can be a little bewildering to look at it and say, oh, how am I ever going to figure out what to do with all that? Really, all you have to understand is one of these strips, right?
Yep.
And when you understand how that works, I mean, there is a couple of things different over here on this side, but as far as the inputs are concerned, if you understand this, then all of them are the same. It's just a matter of deciding how you want to apply the knowledge that you have to each of them, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if we start with the first channel here, we have a slider that turns the volume up and down of sound that comes through the speakers, okay? When it's down like this, you get no sound, and when you put it up all the way to the top, you get more and more and more sound. Typically, the board is designed, there's a little gray area here where they sort of got hash marks. Yeah. That's that's the typical operating range that the board is designed to be worked within. It doesn't mean that you can't run it a little lower. It doesn't mean you can't run it a little higher, but it would be probably not a good idea to constantly be running everything up like this.
Right.
If there was an occasion where you had to do that, perhaps you would do that momentarily and then bring it back down.
Okay. Yeah.
But typically, you want to be running it somewhere, right about, between here, And if you think of that 0 as being sort of your maximum volume, that's a good way to think. But if you have to go beyond it, you can. Now, in addition to that, that slider or fader that turns the volume up and down, it's controlled by this red knob up at the top, which is called a gain, or on this board it's called a gain. Sometimes they call it trim. It's called gain on this board. So what this does is it customizes the signal that's coming in through like your wireless mics here or through these XLR connectors with other things that you plug in. It tailor makes that sound to fit what you're trying to do. So to give an example, let's say that you had 2 identical microphones, and microphones themselves can really vary this as well. Say you had 2 identical microphones, and you have one person who, you got the microphone there? Yeah. Okay, so you have one person who knows how to use a microphone, and they have it right like that, right? You have somebody else who's using it like this. Okay? Now you can see, when you look at it, that if somebody's speaking the microphone like this, the sound person really has no chance to do anything. You can't help much of what's going on. If you're on the mic, then you can do all kinds of things with it. If you're out here like this. So if I were forced as a sound person to work with somebody who will not get the mic where it's supposed to be, like this, then what I could do is I could raise this gain and I could get more volume with it further away. However, when I start to do that, what happens is starting to get feedback, starting to get a lot of other stuff.
Better off, right? Yeah, makes sense.
So, I mean, what this gain does, the other thing, let's say that you've got 5 or 6 of these same mics, they're all the same. So again, if you had totally different mics, there could be one mic that would need more gain than another if they were a different brand or a different model.
Yep.
But with this, what you've got is, you've got 6 that are the same, okay? So if one person uses the mic like this, and the next person uses the mic like this, then you're gonna raise the gain for that one person who's lower, and you're gonna lower it for the guy who's right on it, right?
Yep.
And then those people could also be people who have a really big, powerful voice, or somebody who's, really, really wimpy and hardly make any sound, right? So for that person who is very soft-spoken or, timid, then you're going to raise the gain for that person so that you get enough gain and get what you need. For the person who hollers into the mic like that, well, then you back off the gain so that you get control. So one of the great tools on this board and on almost any board is this thing here, this button just above the fader. It's called PFL. When you press the PFL button, check. What it does is it changes the the meters over here.
All right.
It lets you see what they're doing. So if I press the PFL button and I talk into this mic, if I wanted to set this up, ideally, what I would do is I'd bring it up so that, I bring this up so that my gain was somewhere around 0. Check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, you can have it lower than that. You can have it lower than that, but you don't really want it peaking way up. I'll drop this down a bit to show you. Check, 1, 2. You don't want it way up there. Checking. Somebody's singing loudly. Check. Even without anything on, you can tell that the signal is hot, and it's actually not terrible there. I've seen hotter on some signals, some mics and things. But moving the fader doesn't affect, see when I pull the fader down?
Yeah.
The signal's still there. So it's because PFL is what's called pre-fader listen. So what it's doing is it's listening to the signal before the fader. Right. So the fader isn't affected by it. So this lets you monitor your gain, and it's part of what's called gain staging, and it just means that you're trying to tailor make each part of the signal so that it doesn't overpower the next place. So for example, if this was, on this board we have an input and we have the master on the output. Now if I were to take, if you walked in and you saw the board that was set like this, the gain was cranked up here like this, and these faders are being run down here like this.
Well, yeah.
As soon as you see that, you go, yeah, somebody doesn't know what they're doing, okay?
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're trying to drive so much signal coming in here, and then you're trying to cut it down over here. What you want to do is kind of keep it even through everything.
Yeah.
So you want, excuse me, yes, a good signal here when you have when you check your gain. And then ideally what you do is maybe have this master up somewhere in this gray range or just below it possibly, somewhere up here. And then you run the fader up here so that it's, you don't want this to be down here and this up here. You want them to be, if anything, the other way around if you had to have it one way or the other. But ideally, if they're both in that sort of optimum zone, that's a good thing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that, just to explain a little bit about gain, every mic that you use is going to be different. So every time that somebody comes up and uses the board, your best friend is this PFL button. Now it also serves another purpose. If you plug a set of headphones into this jack over here, and you want headphones that would be closed ear, not like open ones.
Yeah.
They want to block the other sound in the room, so you want headphones that block the sound. So if you put those on, you plug that in and you press this button, it acts like a solo button. So if you have 3 singers and you're not sure who's singing alto, who's singing lead, who's singing tenor, who's singing bass, whatever, you press that button and you can now hear just that one person. You go, oh, okay, they're singing tenor. All right, well, I'll let on. And now I can set the mix with a little more or less tenor because I thought it was too loud. Right?
Yeah.
So it serves 2 purposes. So every time you press that button, it does that. And when you do that, you notice over here the PFL button, the light lights up, says PFL button active, or PFL is active. So that's what that does. Just above the PFL button there's a mute button. It's fairly obvious, but what that does is you can set up your mixer. If you're doing a practice or something, you could have everything, the way that you want it. And then instead of going back and turning everything off, you just mute all the channels. And then just turn the channels on that you need as you need them, right?
Cool.
And the idea there is it's always, the more channels you have open, the more noise or potential for feedback or things like that are happening. And so you clean the sound up when you only have the channels on that you're actually using. Right? So you have you got a bunch of potential for a lot of channels here, and that's good. But if you're not using channels, then turn the mics off and they won't feed back, they won't create extra noise, and they'll keep things more controlled. So that's what that button does. So the next thing we have here is a pan. In practical use, in a live PA, the pan button's the red one here. The practical use is that you will rarely, if ever, I would say, start panning things left and right. If you did, what would happen is it would be on that speaker or it would be on that speaker over there.
Right.
And that's sort of pointless in a PA system. if you're mixing for a record or, you know, making a recording, then of course panning, you might say pan, you know, the rhythm guitar a little bit to the left and the lead guitar a little bit to the right. And maybe if you have a stereo keyboard, you'd have it on 2 channels and you pan it left and right. And you do stuff like that. But for live PA, just leave them in the middle.
Okay.
You don't have to really do that.
Sounds good.
So then if we go up above that, we have a section here that says auxiliary 1, 2, 3, well, it's 1, 2, 3 and effects. Okay, what that part is it allows you to send a different mix to your monitors than you're sending to the main speakers.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you're running the sound from the platform, that can be dangerous because you can fool yourself into thinking things sound really good in the monitors, and your monitors could sound great. Meanwhile, the mix out there is horrendous because you're not listening to what they're listening to. So my advice would be, if you're running the mix from the platform, probably don't do a different monitor mix. That's my opinion. Others might disagree, but that's sort of what I would say. But just for that reason, right? Because it can be misleading, and you can, you know, mess things up, and then people out front aren't hearing. A mic could be literally turned off, and you won't be aware of it because it sounds great through the monitors, right? So if you were using the monitors that way, you can see right now the main speakers are plugged into the left and right outs up here, the top right corner. If you were going to use this to run a different mix to the monitors, what you would do is you would come out of auxiliary 1 and 2, which is over here. It's beside these outputs. So if I came out of auxiliary 1 out with a 1/4-inch jack and ran it into that monitor, then what would happen is each of this row, the first row of black buttons here, they would run the mix for that monitor. Okay, so now this is now, you know, this channel 1, this is the volume for it, this is for channel 2, and so on. So it's like having another mixer inside the mixer. So you can mix a completely different mix for the monitors. If you had certain people, let's say on the platform, who, I don't know, could have hearing impairment, they could have, you know, some need for a different mix than other people, you know, than what you're sending up front, there'd be nothing wrong with feeding one of your monitors the way that you are now from the main mix, taking the other one, and the people who need something different, run it through this and give them a different mix, right? That would be a reasonable thing to do, as long as the person who's running the board is listening to the same mix that everybody else is. So if you had 2 or 3 of those monitors and you wanted to feed different mixes to different people, then you could do that. One of the mixes could come from this, and so if you had one monitor over there and maybe another one over there or something, the guy in the middle's got the main mix. These other monitors, you give them whatever they ask for, and so one would come out of auxiliary 1 here, the other would come out of auxiliary 2. So this would be, the first mix would be from the first row of knobs here. The second mix would be from the second row of knobs here, okay? And those are, if you look on here, it says auxiliary 1 pre and auxiliary 2 pre. So what that means, remember we talked about the PFL button being pre-fader listen? Happens before the fader, pre-fader, right? These are also pre-fader. That means that if I'm mixing and I had this set up in the monitor, and say I had my mic turned up real loud in the monitor, I could take the house and turn me off and I'd still be really loud in the monitor. Right? It's pre-fader. It's before the fader. If it was post-fader, which is the opposite to pre-fader, then what would happen is, as I pull the fader down, this would come down relatively with it, and it would just come down to off. Now, where post-fader is useful, you notice here we've got auxiliary 3 is post-fader. Post-fader is used if you're adding effects. Okay, something like a reverb or a delay, things like that. Now, this board has a built-in effects unit, and it's on this yellow row. The gray one here, there's 2 black ones, and then there's 4 different you know, controls in this strip, right? So the effects for this that are built in, they're automatically post-fader. And if you were running another effects unit with it, which you're probably not, but if you were, then that would be post-fader. Now, one example of a reasonable use for post fader mix. There's pros and cons to this. So I'm going to tell you the pros first, and I'll tell you why not to do it. Okay, so let's say that you were running a live stream, or you're recording the service to stream, or to send out online. Right? If you felt that you were getting a pretty nice mix and everything sounded pretty good in the room, if you took each of these post fader knobs and you turned them all to like 3/4, all of the same position. Whatever level, if they were all set exactly the same, let's just set them at 12 o'clock, just to make it easy. So let's say we set them all at 12 o'clock. But what happened then is, if I make a change in this mix, it affects it relatively. In other words, if I turn this down, it'll turn it down going out to the live feed, right? If I do anything here, if I mute it, it turns that off. Whatever I do, it's after the fader, so it follows the fader, right? So that could be useful in that it would kind of give you an idea of what's going on with out to your live feed, right? The dilemma with that is that you don't have this, I don't think either, but if you were using an acoustic piano, not an electric piano, but an acoustic piano, and you had the piano in this room, chances are, if it was a big grand piano, you wouldn't need to mic it.
Yeah.
It's already loud enough, right? However, if you didn't mic it and you sent this out to broadcast it, if there's no mic in the piano, they will hear no piano.
Yeah.
Right.
Ain't no one
Exactly.
else.
Yeah.
So what you would do in a case like that is if you ran this mix pre-fader, then what you could do is you could have, say the piano was on this channel here, right?
Yeah.
You could turn it off in the room, but you could turn it up
Oh, okay.
for
your feed.
for your feed, right? So it allows you to do that. So in a case like that, what you might do is you might use auxiliary 2. If you're using auxiliary 1 for your monitors, you could use auxiliary 2 for your broadcast feed, and then you could send a completely independent monitor, it's like a monitor mix, but an independent mix for broadcasting, right? And so, certain things in the room, like for example, Bill's got a pretty powerful voice, so if he sings, you hear him in the room without a microphone, but the microphone is also enhancing that. When you listen to that mix back, because you've turned his voice down a bit because he's coming through good already, when you listen to that on a recording or on a broadcast mix, Bill might not be as loud as everybody else because his mic's turned down, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it would be useful to have a pre-fader mix for a live feed or for streaming, that kind of thing, right? Or recording.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but on the other hand, if you don't have operators who are, let's say, experienced enough to kind of figure this out, and it's just too complicated for them, the other thing you can do is just run a post fader feed, and whatever they have in the room is what you'll have in the recording. It won't be perfect, but it might be better than better than having channels turned off because you weren't monitoring them. You forgot to turn this one on, and it was the third singer or something.
Right.
So that's what these are for. So your auxiliaries, you got auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2, both pre-fader, auxiliary 3, post-fader, and then you've got your effects. The effects have a master, like a return, which is this guy over here. You see how this is yellow? This is yellow, so it sort of coordinates to it. So if I wanted to listen to effects on this, let's remember how to do this in this board. Let's see, check. So we don't turn me up, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. So let's go. Oh, I found a crazy one just so we can check. Just turn one of the speakers around this way a bit so we can hear it better. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2. So I put this effect on. Puts me, this is a hall with a delay.
there's a bunch of different ones here, all these different things that we have. Check, check. That's what they call doubling. Check, check, check. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when we go past the first, there's 8 of these. When we go past the 8, as soon as I go past there, let's see if I can show you here. Okay, so it's not on at all now. So I go to the first one. That's now in this second row here. They're labeled. So this is called was it bank 9 to 13. So this is a chorus that they've got on there. So really, what this is, when you see that light shining, it's really this second row over here. When this light lit at the bottom, it says 9 to 16. Okay. And so it's the light, just instead of putting a light here and a light here, there's one set of lights that do it all. Okay, so if we go up here, check, hall, 1, 2. The ones that you're probably most commonly use, this is actually a fairly live room anyway, you don't need a lot of reverb, but if you want to put some reverb on vocals, hall 1 or plates, check, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, check. Not a bad one. Check, 1, 2, plates are pretty good. So you wouldn't want that much, but you could put a little bit of that in. So if I take that and I want it, so let's say you had reverb set up and you had it on all your singers. Maybe you got 5, 6 singers here. You put the reverb setting on everybody about the same. Set them all up the same. And then what you do is your master then turns it on or off, right? So if I want to get a little bit more of everybody, I can bring it up like this, or I can pull it down, I can put it here. So say I say that's the sweet spot. I like that, sounds good, but all of a sudden, Jan comes up to speak. You don't want this on her voice when she's speaking. It sounds funny, right? So you could go like this and just turn it off, or you can just mute that, right? So your effects only use them when people are singing, not when they're speaking in between. And so when they're speaking, press the mute button on that effects channel and turn it off. Okay? And I would say that, you know, in my opinion, you're going to find either one of these plates or one of the halls that you like the sound of. Just use that 99% of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a special event and you want to do some wacky, effect that's kind of like, this is the voice of God.
Yeah.
Then you could, do something, one of these other things in there.
No.
Yeah.
Don't give them ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for the most part, you're going to pick 1 or 2 of these. And the other thing, when you use this, if you turn the board off and turn it back on, I believe it defaults back to whatever you had it on last.
Oh, okay.
So it just sort of stays there. So I'd say, if it were me, I would go with pre-delay. The pre-delay plate should be pretty good. Let's just see. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey, 1, 2. It's not too obnoxious, but it kind of adds a bit of life. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey. By saying it just gives a little bit of life, So that's a pretty good one. So again, just to keep an eye, in case, let's just for the fun of it, turn the board off and turn it back on. It's going to make a little
It's
bit
at
of
the
a
back
pop
here.
because the speakers are there.
The
but-
button.
Go ahead. Just see if it does bring it back. Okay, yeah, it does. I thought so. So it does save the setting, and so you can just bring it back and use it as you wish. I'd say you're either going to use that one, or you might use that hall 1 or 2. So if you go down to hall 1, check. That's a nice one.
Yeah, that's a nice one, yeah.
Check. And the other thing is, check. I like hall 1, pretty good. So if you had a big ballad, kind of a slower song, use a hall.
Yeah.
If you have an up-tempo, kind of a choppy kind of a song, bop, that kind of thing, use the plate.
Okay.
Because it won't sustain. If you have a choppy song, all that sustain on it sounds
Just
funny.
noise.
Yeah.
Because washes everything together. So use good. That's RF interference on your wireless coming from something. We'll go back here. It was the second one. Check. 1, 2. plate is the plate. So I put that back on. Could be one of these other channels that we're not using. It's not, the mic isn't on. And so what's happening, just so that you know what's happening
Would
with that.
phones interfere with your RF?
They can. I mean, it's radio frequency, so it could interfere. But what happens? Actually, it's a good teaching moment. What just happened there? Okay. So if you have all of your wireless mics here and they're all plugged into the board, and the faders are all up like this, and you hear noise like that, half the time the reason for the noise is because the other mics aren't on. Okay? If the mic isn't on, think of each one of these as, you know how when you go on your FM radio and you go between stations and you hear,
Yeah.
right? Well, these are now an open radio station. And all it needs is anything to excite the signal a little bit and make that noise, right?
Okay.
So what you want to do is, if mics are not switched on, mute the channels. Right?
Okay.
And if they're on, then they should be locked in. You shouldn't get interference. They can get interference. I mean, you're right next to the fire hall or whatever
Yeah.
here, right?
Yeah.
So they have radios and stuff that have probably a pretty strong signal.
Yeah.
And so it's entirely possible that they could interfere with your stuff. These theoretically should be on different frequencies than what they're using, but when they're so close, or if the antenna is right on the same building or something, well, a radio receiver picks up the strongest signal.
It's like a radio operator
Yeah.
having a linear amplifier and
Yeah.
interfering with somebody's stereo or
Yeah.
TV.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that's also why when you buy any piece of equipment, anything, a TV, anything you buy, if you read the little fine print on it, says, you know, we're not responsible if this interferes with anything else. If it interferes, stop using it.
Don't bring it
already
back.
bought it.
Most people don't even see that, but that's what it's about, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's happening with that. So it's a good thing to know. Like, if you were sitting there and that happened to you, you might, if someone didn't tell you that, you might not realize, well, why am I getting all that crackling and noise and stuff going on? It's because those channels are on the board, but the receiver's connected. It's on, but the microphone that's transmitting to it, when it comes on, it locks into that frequency, and as long as it's the strongest signal hitting it, it won't get interfered with. But if there was another more powerful signal, you know, somebody driving by in a police car or something, you know, it's possible that it could interfere with it. Right? So that's sort of what that part of it's about. So let's go on up here, further up on this, and look at the next part up here. So I'm going to start from the opposite end, and we'll go up. We've got our gain control, which you understand tapers or Taylor makes the gain. What you don't want to happen is, if you think of this as these are the inputs. If you were feeding something into that input, and the input is like this, and you're trying to drive a great big signal into it, it's going to distort. It can't handle it, right? So you have to open this up so that this part here fits, so that it's a Taylor fit, right? So what this gain knob does is it does exactly that. If you've got a hot signal that's too hot coming in here, you're trimming it down so that you control the signal that's coming in. If you have a weak signal coming in where someone's speaking too far from their mic, or they're very soft spoken, then you're going to raise that gain up, right? Which is what we talked about at the beginning. Now, if we go beyond that, just past that gain, there's this little button here, which is a high pass or a low. It's either called high pass or low cut. They're the same thing. What it means is it rolls off everything. See how there's like a little line and then it cuts down and it says 100 hertz, right? So what it's doing is it's taking everything from 100 hertz and cutting it off. Okay, so if I speak in this mic without that on, let's just set this up. I'll speak in here like this, and so now if I press that button, instead of getting a lot of like that kind of boominess, if you had mics sitting on stands, and this is a hollow platform, you get the people walk around. When you press that high pass filter or low cut filter, it's getting rid of just that muddy stuff that really has no purpose, unless you have an actual bass singer, or maybe you're miking a bass guitar amplifier, or you're I don't know, something else that has low frequency content, like miking a bass drum or something like that,
Yeah.
you wouldn't press that button. But for pretty much everything else, the best advice is always press all those buttons. If you're
Okay.
playing back music from a soundtrack,
Yeah.
don't press that button.
Okay.
Because you want that low frequency, you can adjust it from here. But for your speech, this gets rid of a lot of problems. In that low end, if the mic was going to feed back, let's see if we can make it feed back. Check, 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 check. Hear that kind of low rumble? Okay, so if I press that, there's still high feedback, but we got rid of the low problem.
Yeah.
That just eliminates that part of it for you. So this is one of your, next to your PFL button, which is your best friend to check your gains and stuff. This one here is your next best friend as a sound operator to just put on all the channels.
Okay.
And it just cleans things up. Gets rid of that muddiness, makes things sound clearer, cleaner, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the next thing we have here is we have 4 knobs, which are for the equalizer on the board, okay? Now you can see when I first turned the speaker around and was trying to set it up, I boosted a little bit of the highs on this one just because I thought it made it a little cleaner for my speech to talk to you. I wouldn't put that up like that either. I turned it up to try to make it boomy. Check, check, check. You don't really want that either. So you notice if you turn these knobs, everybody just try and turn them. You'll see what happens. Yeah, there's what's called a center detent. So see if you turn it,
Oh,
it'll
yeah, yeah.
stop in the center. And this one's the same. This one's the same. Okay, the blue ones all have that center detent. So it means that when it's sitting in that spot where it stops, it's not boosting, it's not cutting, it's not doing anything. So it's an easy way to know that you're not really affecting anything with it. This low cut filter or high pass filter, it isn't affected by these. It sort of works independent of these knobs. So if it's on, you can leave these flat and this will still do its job. When they're in the middle and they're at that center detent, that's called flat. It means that there's no boost, no cut. With equalization, to describe it to somebody who isn't familiar with it, if you think back to, I don't know, when I think back, you're probably not as old as me, but when I was a kid, I go to my grandmother's house, she had a record player. The record player had a volume control on it, it had a tone control, okay? Tone, if you turned it all the way to the left, sounded kind of bassy, and it got rid of the highs. And when you turned it all the way to the right, it sounded quite tinny, The original equalizer that they put on, consumer equipment was just that tone control.
Yeah.
Well, then they came up with an idea, well, wouldn't it be neat if you could, like with it, the problem was if you wanted it to be bassier, you lost the treble. And if you wanted it trebler, you lost the bass, right? So if you set it in the middle, that was kind of did nothing, and it just kind of worked, right? So I said, well, why not put a treble control and a bass control, right? So the treble control went from 0 to 10, and the bass control went from 0 to 10. So basically what happened with that is, if you wanted more treble, you could turn it up 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10. If you wanted more bass, you could turn it up to 10. Okay, so now we can add treble and bass. That's great. Problem with that is, what if you didn't really want to add treble or bass, but you actually wanted to take it away, right? So the next thing they did was they made treble and bass controls that started in the center like this. If you turn to the left, you could cut. If you turn to the right, you could boost, right? That's what this does, okay? So it made it extremely more useful because now you could actually, a lot of times you didn't really want more bass, you just wanted less treble, right?
Yeah.
So if you could turn the treble down, that was enough to get rid of the bass problem, okay? So then, beyond that, they came up with this idea, well, what if we made a mid control that was between the treble and bass? Then you'd have the whole world by the tail, right? You could, maybe the highs and lows are okay, but the mids need to be adjusted, right? So again, you can boost or cut them. So what this board has is it has what's called a semi-parametric equalizer. So that is basically the center section of this that actually causes that. The top and bottom knobs, the top knob is your treble, if you want to say it, it's high frequency treble. The low one is the bass, okay, and that's low frequency, okay? So LF for low frequency, HF for high frequency. If you take this high frequency and you turn it up like this, check, 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 you can get more highs, but if I've got the speaker aimed at the microphone like we do now, which is not good, you're going to get feedback, which is what happens when you do that, right? So again, I'm going to boost my highs a little bit here. I'm going to adjust my gain down so that doesn't feedback. Put that down a little bit too. I've already cut the bottom end here, but if I wanted to cut more bottom end, I could do that so that it doesn't rumble or boom as much. Check, 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 check. I might cut a little bit of that. This is the one that throws people because sometimes they don't understand how it works, so I'm going to try and explain it to you. The black knob here is, okay, the top and bottom one, to go back to them, is what they call a shelving EQ. Someone has predetermined that the perfect frequency to boost the highs at, in this case, is 12 kilohertz, okay? And they've decided that the perfect to boost or cut is at 12, and that the perfect frequency to boost or cut the low frequency is 80 hertz. However, in the middle, this is the one where you can get a lot of control. And so what they've done is they've given you a knob here that you can turn, and you now pick the frequency that you want to boost or cut at. They've pre-selected it for the treble and the bass, or the highs and the lows, but the mids, you can now control what frequency you want to boost or cut at. And where this can be really, one application for it would be if someone had a very, very harsh voice, and they had a certain frequency in their voice that was very nasally and obnoxious, right? Check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. So what I could do is I could take that, find the frequency that sounds the worst, and then cut it, right? So when I go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, it gets rid of that nasally, harsh sound, right? That's one use for it. Another use would be if you were using the microphones and you couldn't get them to work without getting feedback. Now, this isn't the ideal way to use it, but it is a useful way to use it, okay? And there's times when you want to do this. So let's just say that I want to have a certain amount of volume here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this knob up, which is the boost or cut. So I'm going to boost it up high, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this knob, that's the frequency, and I'm going to turn it around, and as I turn it around, it'll be selecting all the different frequencies, and I'm going to find the place that makes the most feedback, okay? The place where the biggest problem is. So I'm going to bring it up here, I'll turn it all the way up to the top, check 1, 2, so I got it boosted all the way. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to sweep the frequencies, bring up a little more volume here. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can hear it right on the threshold of check, 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 check. Hear that? Check, 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 check. Right. That's a bad one. Keep going here. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, that's another bad one. Okay, so that's probably a worse one than the other one because it started to feedback worse than the other. And if I go around a little further here, I can probably find something else that's going to cause a problem. Check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, that one's also going to be problematic. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. There's one. Okay, so those are all those are the 4 frequencies that are the worst problem. Now I'd say the one that's most likely to be the problem for you was the second one that we did. So let's go back over here. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You don't have to find them all, but I'm just demonstrating that you can. Check 1, 2. So we were up high. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Okay, there's the one right there that I'd say is going to be problematic. So now we're going to take this knob that we boosted, we're going to turn it up to 12 o'clock where the center detent is, and then we're going to just cut some of it. So what we're doing is we're taking just the channel that the frequency that has the feedback, and we're going to cut that feedback frequency. So now when I bring the mic up to the same volume, I don't have feedback, and that I can get away with more volume without feedback, right? I can even bring the gain up higher, and I still don't have feedback, right? If I turn this off, check, we can probably get it to feedback again here by, yeah, there it is. So it's just cutting out the frequency that the problem's at. So that's a trick that you can use if you're getting feedback, especially with monitors and things, if people are with monitors, because we got the speakers aimed toward us just like you would with a monitor.
Yeah.
Now ideally with a monitor, what you want to do is you always want to keep the back of your microphone toward the front of the speaker. So if that's a monitor, you wouldn't put it like this, or you wouldn't put it sideways to it. You try to keep the positions so that if this is your, you know, your monitors are like a wedge here, right? So you put your mics like this, right? Aim them away. If I take them and aim them down there toward it, you're flirting with disaster. You're making a loop, right? Of course. So you want to avoid that. This is just another tool that you can use to help to minimize, you know, feedback issues that you have. So if you pull the mics up and all of a sudden you hear feedback, if the feedback was check. Let's see, this is, we'll flatten that out. Check. 1 2 1 2 1 2 2 2 2 2 2 2 2 2. Hear it right on the threshold there, right? If I take that frequency, cut it out, it just takes out that frequency, the feedback frequency that we had there. So your mids, if you had this blue knob, this one here for the mids, MF mid frequency, if you had it set in the middle, you could take this black knob and turn it all day long and it won't do anything at all.
Okay.
Because the only time it does anything is when you either boost or cut with this knob, right? So this is where you select the frequency, this is where you boost or cut. These ones, the frequency is pre-selected for you, so you can boost or cut at those frequencies. Most of the time, when you're using an equalizer, I would say 80% of the time, the best thing to do is do more cutting than you do boosting. Boosting maybe on the highs, just a little more, you know, intelligibility or sparkle in the sound, like I've done here. Check 1 2 1 2 2 2 2. It just gives a little bit more, you know, edge to the sound. So you can boost a little bit in the highs, but you know, you wouldn't want to be going like that, right? That's too much, and it's also going to cause feedback. But if you want to boost a little bit on the highs, you know, that's a reasonable thing to do. I would cut oftentimes a little bit on the lows so that you don't get this kind of thing happening all the time. Cut a little bit of those lows. Have your low cut filter, high pass filter pressed in, and you set your gain by pressing this. Check 1 2. Put that down. Set this up. Check as long as it's not. If it was up, you know, clipping like way up there, then you're going to have to back this off, right? But it can be lower than that if you need. But that's where you want to have it. So let you know what's going on with it. And theoretically, like if you had a bunch of people come in and you hadn't done anything in terms of the sound at all, if you just turned the whole master rate down to next to nothing and had them just do what they do, and you went through and pressed your PFL button and checked every channel on the board, if you set them all up so that none of them are going over 0, if you bring all these faders up, you'll have a reasonably good sound before you do anything else, without even having to listen to it. Because you're going to have them, if you set them all the right way like that, if you set your gains all the same, if every channel was set so that it was at, I don't know, -6, right? When you bring the faders up, instead of, like if you wanted to get a different, if you wanted them all the people to be the same volume, as soon as you bring the faders up, they're all the same volume because you've already preset their gain to -6, right? If you didn't do that, then you might find that in order to get them all to sound the same, that you've got one fader here and one here and one here, and you're doing all this kind of stuff all the time, right? So always set every, like on a regular basis, even while you're doing a service, if you're the sound person, press those PFLs and just check it. Just make sure that somebody isn't clipping or that something, you know, go through them. And as you press them, like normally if I'm using the board and there's, you know, sound on the system, there is going to be some activity on these meters depending on how loud, you know, what's going on is. When you press these buttons, it switches the meters. That red light comes on, it switches the meters, and makes the meters work for the
Right.
gain settings, right, for the pre-fader listen.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I mean, that's the most of the board. Now, over on this side, you notice we got a bunch of gray faders, 16 of them, and then we have 3 blue faders. The blue faders would be the ones that you would typically use if you're going to plug in a computer and play back soundtracks, or if somebody brought their phone or their iPad or something, you're going to play back tracks. You need the right patch cord for that, and that would be a cord like this one here, right? So with this one, what you would do with that is, let's see the best. Plug this in. Just got to see where it is on this board. 16, 17.
Take this hydrant.
Oh, that's where it is. That's what it is. Yeah. And is there? There's another jack here. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, we can tear
That's
that
what's
off,
going-
Dave.
That's what's going on. It's just
Okay.
freaking me out. Couldn't figure out where the other place was to plug in. So for those channels, what you do is your tape would just go over here.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So what happens with these is these channels that are the blue ones, these are stereo inputs. So if you had a keyboard, you know, like a keyboard that has a stereo output, you plug, like you have a cable like this, which is what we have here from your laptop. So let's say we're going to plug the laptop into the last one here. So we plug the left and right into the 2
Okay, good.
channels there, left and right. If you only plug it into one of them, you only hear half the signal. You hear
Oh,
only half
okay.
the channel. So plug it into left and right, and then the signal will actually come back in stereo. If you leave this in the center, it gives the same amount to the left and right, and it gives you a stereo image. And then this is your master volume for that, right? So if you're playing back a soundtrack, you would never put reverb, or I should say, there's never a never, but normally you wouldn't put reverb on the soundtrack or any effects on it. And then if you're running a monitor mix, if you wanted more soundtrack for the people on the monitors, you could turn up the soundtrack louder for them, but not have it as loud out there, right? So if you're running a separate monitor mix out of one of these outputs, you would do that. So it has the same features. This part here is all the same. The part that's different is this top section where you've got your equalizer. So on these stereo playbacks, they're assuming that the music that's on your laptop or your phone or your iPad has already been equalized and has already been mastered by somebody. So there's not as much need to do as much tweaking as you would. So they give you a simple high and low boost or cut. So if you need to add a bit more thump to it, you can turn the bass up.
Nice.
If it's, but you don't have to, you can leave it flat, you know? But if you want to make it a little, you know, thumpier, you can turn the bass up, right? Or turn the treble down or whatever. You still have a gain on it, just like you have here. So you can adjust the gain to get the signal the way you want it. And if you press that PFL on it, and you were to play something, I don't know if you have anything there you
Yep,
can play,
I can.
but just play something and we'll lay in
And
here.
you hold that for me, Brent?
Yep.
Play everything now. So when we press the PFL here on this, you can see that there's signal coming out of the computer. You can tell there's something there.
Yeah.
If we crank that up, let's say, I don't know if you got a volume on the computer, if you turn it up, like turn it up loud, just like turn up your volume as loud as it goes kind of thing to start with, or just to give me a level here. Okay. All right, so I just wanted to just, oh, that's all right. It could be the volume, this is YouTube or something, so maybe there's a volume control on YouTube itself. Probably that, right? Probably just, there's your speaker there.
Oh,
You adjust it.
yeah.
There you
Yeah,
go.
it's up
So that's good. Turned up full blast. Okay, and then I don't know where your outputs on the computer should be, like a volume control on it somewhere. But anyway, we'll just say it's turned up pretty loud, okay? So now what we can do is before we ever turn it on, if we know that we want to set our level at say -6 or whatever, I guess it's, okay, so now what we can do is we start to bring the volume up. We got the volume there, right? So
So even before we turn it up, we kind of had some control of it. So then if I want to add some, there's not much bass in that, it's just piano.
Do you want me to put a different one on?
But yeah, you can put something else. Put something else on that's more like a full band kind of a thing. There's nothing wrong with that. That's nice too. But just it's piano and vocal kind of thing, so it's a little simpler. And that's the other thing too, is you're pulling stuff off YouTube or whatever. Sometimes the levels can vary all over the place.
Yeah.
Something can be super loud and something can be really soft.
That's exactly
So
right.
so with this, you can check it before you bring the volume up for everybody, and then when you bring it up. So if you there's your treble, or you can cut it in the middle. It sounds pretty good the way it is. So you don't have to do much of anything to that. It sounds great, right? But if you did want to boost some boost, you can on it. Whatever you want to do, right? So each of these have this capability. So if you plug your keyboard into one of the other ones, if you had a iPad or something, you plug into the other one, you've got 3 stereo channels. If that device only has a single plug that comes out of it, they're labeled here. Usually you put it says LM, it means mono. So you plug it into that one. If it's a single signal, you just plug it into the one that has LM or means mono, right? So it's a mono signal, you plug it in there, right? So somebody, I don't know, you're not going to have this happen, I don't think, with this many channels, but if you'd used up all your channels and somebody came in with their guitar and they needed to plug in, you could plug somebody's guitar into one of these channels and plug it directly into that mono channel, and then use that as an extra input for that person's guitar, right? So that does that. Now there's some other kind of fancy things here which you may not need to use. If you're using this board in a home studio and you wanted to be able to, do what we're doing here, but you wanted to have a separate set of monitors that you could play back the music and stuff from that you're recording off your computer or something, then you can use some of these RCA plugs up here for control room monitor and stuff like that. And if you do that, then they're available. These other inputs up here are available for stuff like that. It's not a thing that's likely to be used in a normal, church or worship setting, so it's more for home studio use. Or if you were going to do a podcast or something like that, and you're going to use the board to do that, the board has a USB out, and you can, do a bunch of stuff like that too. But so the other thing that I didn't mention before is we talked about the faders on the board have a master that turns the whole thing up and down. That's affected by, it affects everything, right? These auxiliaries also have a master, and the master for the auxiliaries are over here. So if you turn these on and turn them up and you didn't have any sound, the reason would be because those aren't turned on, right? So they'd have to be turned up, just like this master has to be up. These masters have to be up for this, right? This is your master volume for those. For auxiliary 1 and 2, which are the pre-fader auxiliaries, there's a master for those. For auxiliary 3, there is not a master. The only master is how loud you put each of these. So with these ones, if you had the whole thing set up and you said, oh, the whole thing's too loud or too soft, you can adjust it. With auxiliary 3, you have to change the volume of everything to adjust the overall volume, because that's just how it's designed. But it's because it's post fader, so these faders are affecting it. So these two have a master, these ones don't. The yellow one, which is the reverb, does have a master, and it's right there. So that's basically what else have we got here? Yeah, the other thing you could do, if just to let you know that, is on your reverb channel that you have that's like the effects return, brings the effects sound back into the mixer. if you want to bring their effects into the monitors, so that the singers in the monitors can hear reverb in the monitor, you would do it here. Okay, so this brings the effect back into the monitor.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so if you want, now some people love it, some people hate it. It's some people really, I like it myself.
Yeah,
I
me
like
too.
to have effects in the monitors. However, when you have effects in the monitors, you have to be aware that it does create extra potential for feedback. So if you're having feedback issues, backing that off a little bit, giving it less effect in the monitors, will help to minimize the feedback issues, because when you're adding that extra reverb, you're creating potential for more feedback. So that's what that does. But it's nice that some boards back in the day didn't have this option, so you had to literally patch it. You had to take an output of your mixer, take the output of the reverb and patch it into an input channel on your board, and then bring it up on the monitors, right? And so you ended up using a channel an extra channel on the board just for effects. Not a bad thing, because then you could take your EQ and EQ the effects and do stuff like that. But it was more like when you had your effects in an external reverb unit or some other effects unit on the side, and you patch it in and out of the board. With this, because they built it into the effects, it's really nice because you can add it or not add it as you want. You're not using any other channels up to accomplish that. So that's a quick overview of everything. Questions?
Is there a test?
So
Yeah,
these should be the same all the way, for all the mics?
No.
No.
Not
No,
necessarily?
they not necessarily. It
depends.
all has to do with how
How
loudly
close
or
and
how
how far.
close each
Okay,
performer
okay.
is from the mic.
Yeah.
So, every mic should be set up. I mean,
Individually,
if every Sunday Bill uses the green mic, then you can set the green mic for Bill and never probably ever have to change it, right?
I think we
But
should,
if,
yeah.
it's a good idea to
Less
do that. Plus for
hassle.
sanitary reasons these days with COVID and all
Yeah,
that other
yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
if you give somebody a certain mic and they always get the same one, then they're not giving, passing
Yeah.
something on to somebody else if they've got a cold or something. So, so doing that, if you preset those gains for each person, once you've set them up, it never hurts to just go like that when they're singing and find out if it's, in the zone where you would expect it to be. But if you press those buttons and you notice that all of them are about like that, but one of them is halfway there, well then that one may need the gain turned up a little bit, And that's what you want to do. It's really a lot of lesser expensive or lower end equipment doesn't have that capability to be able to check the gain. And so the only thing you have going for you is some of them have a peak light that lights up that means that it's clipping, that it's overdriving. Once it does that, it's too late. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's it's telling you that disaster has already happened. With this, you have the ability to avert the disaster before it happens, right? So what I was just I guess the other thing I could say is that in setting up the mic here, if we bring this back up a second.
So everything that you explained
Yeah.
would pertain to mics that would be also plugged in rather than
Same principles.
Okay, yeah.
Except the mics that are plugged in are usually plugged into the XLRs.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
These could also be plugged in with XLR. It just happened that they came with cables like this.
Okay.
So we set them up with those, and because they're so close, with XLR cables, you can run them typically up to about 250, maybe 300 feet with no problem. With 1/4-inch jacks like this, you're really not supposed to exceed 20 feet.
Oh,
But because this is right next to it, or if you had somebody, playing their guitar right nearby, a guitar cord is anywhere from, typically they're 10 feet or 20 feet, maybe sometimes somewhere in between. So a 20-foot cable with the mixer right nearby, you could plug right directly in. But if you were running from, somebody way over in the corner over there with a band, and you wanted the guitar player to plug in, what you do is you plug in a mic cable. You run that to a direct box, which is a little transformer box. And what it does is these inputs here that are 1/4-inch are all high impedance. High impedance means usually typically 10,000 ohms or more, sometimes 20,000 ohms. Low impedance is usually 600 ohms or less. So 600, a lot of mics are 200 ohms, 300 ohms, anywhere to 600 ohms, right? So 600 ohms is a low impedance signal. It will travel a long distance without any signal degradation. So if you plug a mic cable into this, say 25, 50 foot cable, run it over to the guitar player and then put a direct box on the end of it, where he plugs in with his guitar, he's using maybe a 10-foot cord. It's high impedance, it goes to the direct box. The direct box converts 20,000 ohms to 200 ohms and sends it through your snake or through the cable over to this XLR input, right? And so that's the difference between these plugs and those plugs. And normally on most boards like this, you'd be using all these ones, but because these units came with these cables, rather than sell you 6 more $30 cables, we did it this way, right? So that's how it works. Okay.
These buttons should
Yes.
be down one at a time. They shouldn't be
You
all
can
down.
you can press 2 of them at once. Let's say that you had 3 singers up singing, and you weren't sure who was doing, who was singing which part. So you press 1, you say, oh, that's lead, oh, that's tenor, that's alto, right? So now if you pressed all 3 of them and you had your headphones on, you could actually hear the 3 of them, and now you could actually balance them. You go, oh, okay, I guess maybe the tenor's a little loud, I'll back them down a little bit, right? So it would give you a chance to sort of isolate the singers and just set a mix up on them. Now, you have to remember that if you did something really wonky, that it's going to be heard out there too. But it is a way to just sort of double check things. So you can press more than one at once.
I see.
Yeah, you can. And so if you wanted to just hear what the balance of the lead singer compared to the piano was, you press both of them. If you see that the piano is blowing the singer away, then you can say, well, I guess maybe I must have my singer too low. So you can raise your gain a little bit on the singer, check turn that one off, check your gain, bring the singer up a bit, bring them up in the mix a bit, whatever you need to do.
And this gain is sort of fine tuned.
It is. It's the signal. When the signal comes in, the way that the signal works is it comes into these plug-ins up at the top, and it comes through this. And when it goes through this, then it comes to all this other stuff. And at the end of it is this guy here, which is what you let people hear it with. So when the signal comes in here, you set that gain up by pressing the PFL. You get a nice gain on the microphone. And then what you do is you set up your EQ. So because the EQ is really another volume control, right? Except that it's turning up the volume on a certain frequency, right? So in this case, 12 kilohertz is a high, like a treble frequency. If you start turning that up, well, it's turning the volume up on the highs, right? And then this middle, wherever you pick for it, most of the time, I would say most of the time, you're never going to boost one of those mid frequencies. It's going to be used almost always to cut something. But on the lows, possibly you could boost something, or you can cut it. But again, it's a volume control. So as soon as you start to boost it, it's like you push this volume up a little bit, but just on the bass, right? When you push this volume up, it's affecting all frequencies, it's making them all louder or softer. So the signal comes in through here, goes through this, you set the gain, you set up your EQ. If you're sending the signal to a separate monitor mix, it goes through this. If you're sending it to broadcast, it goes to one of these two. And then your effects come through this one here. So if this was a bass guitar, you would never put a reverb on a bass guitar. So you wouldn't have that reverb on at all. But when I say that, you might possibly put a reverb on a bass guitar, but 99.9% of the time you wouldn't. So, if it's something like a keyboard that already has sounds in it, you don't really need to change them, so you keep that reverb off. Mostly it's just for singers. Put it on the singers. If you have a pastor's mic or a little ear clip mic or that kind of a thing, you'd never put reverb on it unless they're singing.
Yeah.
Sometimes a worship leader and some bands, they'll have that, and you would put it on that. But again, it's more, those mics are a little more prone to feedback than these ones are. So, putting reverb on them can, create problems for yourself. But sometimes you need it, and if you do, you do it. But basically everything comes through this, and then comes down through here. the pan, and then your volume. And this is just where you take all the stuff that you've already perfected up here, and then you just blend it. You say, this is, I want to hear that much of that one, I want to hear that much of that one. Set them up. What I like to do, if you set those gains up, if I have, in this case, you got 5 or 6 vocal mics. If you have 5 or 6 singers, I find it very awkward if they're like this.
Yeah.
It's awkward. You can't do anything with them, right? So if you set your gains up,
Easier to set it here. And
set your
have
gains up.
everything.
Set your gains up so
Yeah.
you got them all even, and then you can look at them and you can see instantly if they're all set at say -5. You know that all the people are the same volume, right? If you need to change them, you can just pull them all down together, right? And it's nice and easy when it's a straight line. But when they're all over the place, it's
You don't know
awkward.
what's what, yeah.
So it's a lot better. Now, sometimes if something weird is happening and you're not sure, something doesn't seem right in terms of what the meters are doing over here. See what's happened? I've got this channel on the PFL, so that red light over there is lit up. So if you notice your meters aren't working or something, I had 2 or 3 of these pressed, and they do light up red as well, but you can miss them, right?
Yeah.
So if you look over there, you can see.
You
So
know
if
something's
you
open.
think you turned them all off, no, I missed that one, right? So that's Mackie, that make mixers, used to have a light on their boards. It was a bigger light than that, and it flashed when it did that, and it was called the Rude Solo button. And so it just meant that it flashed really obviously, so you couldn't miss that it was that something was assigned, to the solos. But anyway, that light is there, and it's fairly obvious. So if you were using headphones on the board, there's your headphone volume control right there. Okay, so you can set that up. The other thing you can do with the headphones is you can pick what signal you want to listen to. So if you had monitors that you're running for somebody, and you're sitting over here and the monitor's over there, and you're not sure what they're hearing, plug your headphones in, press auxiliary 1, and when you press auxiliary 1, now you can listen to the mix that these people are listening on auxiliary 1.
Right.
And this is really useful if you're, say, doing a feed for streaming or something, right? So if that would say the streaming was on auxiliary 2, press auxiliary 2, put your headphones on, and you can set up the mix and listen to exactly what the people that you're sending it to are listening to, right? Now, in a case like a live mix like that, let's say in this room, you don't really need a lot of, it's a fairly live room, like, it's a pretty live room, it's got its own reverb, right? However, if everybody's on their mic properly and they're like this, and they're singing and you're recording this, it's going to be very dry, very, very dry, and it won't sound anything like it sounds like in the room, okay? So what you'd do in a case like that is you'd bring up this reverb. You might not have the reverb up very high in the room with it all. You might even have it turned down. You have to have it unmuted. But if you have it turned down really low, what you can do is you can bring the reverb up quite high on the broadcast feed and to make it sound like the room. And if you put on your headphones, you can hear how much to add, right? So it's a great way to be able to tell what's going on with that. These other knobs up here, in terms of what these do, you got a stereo return, 2-track return, and a USB return. So these are for like playing back things. If you had, say, a computer hooked up to this and you're recording with your USB out into some sort of a digital audio workstation on your computer, you could record everything that's coming out of the board. It'd be stereo.
I don't see the USB out on this.
There is somewhere, right here. It's right here.
Oh, it's up
right
there.
Yeah. So it's right there. So you come out of there into your computer, and then you're depending on what you're using for software on your computer, would be recording it. So if you wanted to play it back, the USB thing here is here, and you press that button and turn the volume up. You just have to be careful when you're doing stuff like that you're not recording at the same time as you make a loop, and then it would start to feed back, and you could damage your speakers or your hearing or whatever when it does that. But that's what these are for, and there's a stereo return here. So that would be the stereo return. So say you had I don't know, if you're recording in the old days on a cassette deck, and you wanted to play back what you had recorded, you would have the output of the cassette deck plugged in there. You press that button and you turn the volume up and you play back the volume out of your cassette deck. But again, if you did that while you're recording, it'd go and be feeding back, right? So that's what those knobs are for. There's 3 there. One's 2 tracks, so again, stereo return 1, and then I guess stereo return 1 would be if you're using like an external reverb unit or something. You could bring it back into this and then use it just like this return for your reverb. You could use it here without using up a channel on the board. So that is, that's what those do. There's another set of buttons there. That's up and pre and post. Auxiliary 2, auxiliary 3 effects. Up. Oh yeah, we didn't cover this. So some mics have phantom power. Anybody ever hear of phantom power?
Yeah.
So phantom power is, the microphone uses DC voltage to feed a preamp in the microphone to make the microphone hotter, cleaner, brighter, all those kind of things. If you had a phantom powered mic and you didn't have that phantom power turned on, you wouldn't get anything out of the mic at all. Some podium mics, like the ones that are like a little miniature gooseneck and they kind of come out of a podium, those are pretty much all phantom powered mics. So they're hotter than other mics, and that's why because they have that preamp in them, it gives them 48 volts of power. So in order to use that kind of a mic, you have to have this switch turned on. And what they've done on this board is they've made it so that you can't sort of accidentally turn it on. So right now, if I try to press it, I can't press it far enough. I'd have to use a ballpoint pen, or I could use like the tip of my knife here, right? I press it down, turns that red light on.
Okay.
So if you have a phantom power, now I mean some more sophisticated boards have a switch for phantom power in every channel, but that's pretty, more high end. So if you had a phantom powered mic that you use regularly, I would just leave that on all the time, because you'll forget to turn it on, the mic won't work, and somebody won't be able to figure out why. But if you're not using it, then you can just leave it off. That's what that does. And then these buttons here, you've got auxiliary 1, 2, auxiliary 3, up equals left, right, post. So auxiliary 1, 2. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm guessing, if I were guessing, I'm guessing that maybe, I guess you can switch, maybe you can switch auxiliary 1 and 2 to post instead of pre. They're automatically pre, but if you press that down, they become post. So they would follow the fader instead of being in front of the fader. And auxiliary 3, I guess, I'm guessing what this does is it moves auxiliary 3, it makes it the effects instead of this being the effects. That's what it says. And left, right, pre. I'm not sure. You have to look in the manual, honestly. The manual will tell us that. I guess it is right there. But I think we covered everything else, but that I'm not absolutely
We
sure.
probably wouldn't be using it anyway.
think
We wouldn't be using it
get
anyway.
that.
Yeah.
Well, one nice thing is that they actually have a reasonably decent manual here. That a lot of manuals are hard to see and hard to figure out what they're doing. But this is, or they don't even come with one. You have to download it. And
That's usually
yeah,
the way it is now.
yeah,
Yeah,
they don't send a manual. Those buttons are right above the internet. Buttons are right above. The fact that it has a delay built into it. Some of them will say like pre-delay, like this one here, play pre-delay. If you tap in time to the music, it'll actually put the delay in time with the music. So if you're going, like in the past, you'd have like a screen and it would have like a bunch of milliseconds, and so you'd have to, calculate, if the song was at 120 tempo and it was in 4/4, well then, you'd set your certain number of milliseconds for that. With this, you just tap it in time with the music. So anytime your effects will then sound nicer because they're right in sync with the music. And if you want to do double time, like the song's going 1, 2, 3, 4, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, you go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4,
Right.
and when you do that, then it's faster, like double the speed, or you can go half time or whatever, So that's what it does. But I'm just kind of curious what that That's the only thing we haven't really covered, and I don't even see it listed here. So I don't know why they didn't cover that. But I don't think it's something you honestly really ever use.
No.
But it's kind of nice to know what things are, and I don't know what that is. It's got to be. They're all okay. So they're all connected. Oh, I know what it is. I know exactly what it is. Okay, makes sense. They've got a line running from USB down.
Yes.
So basically, if you decided to want to record, you can either record auxiliary 1 and 2,
Okay.
or you can record auxiliary 3 with effects, or you can take the left-right mix over here and record that. So if you were sending that USB out to your computer and you're going through something like OBS to feed it out to stream it, you would pick whatever you wanted to send, whatever signal you wanted to send, and then it will send the USB signal that you pick. So if it's auxiliary 1 and 2, where that would be awkward is if you did auxiliary 1, 2, if you were using monitors on 1 and trying to live stream on 2, you'd end up with a combination of monitors and the live stream, which wouldn't be good. So you wouldn't want to use that for that. But if you went auxiliary 3 with effects, that's where you could, like I was saying, sometimes that would be a good way to go for your live stream. As long as you put headphones on and check it.
Right.
And you go over here to your auxiliary 3 and
We need noise canceling
actually,
headphones.
see that here.
Yeah, we do.
Sure. I guess you could plug in the computer and listen to it on the computer and then do it that way. But that would be the way to do it, I guess.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's, you know,
I mean, I'm sure that now if I just had any one of you down here and let you do it, that you'd have it all figured out perfectly.
well, yeah, so
But-
much.
Oh, yeah.
After all, we are from,
For them.
I'm
We
doing
are
it now. I'm doing it.
they were from Sealy's Bay, what do you?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I mean,
We're all
I'm
related.
happy to answer any other questions too. But I mean, it all just is a matter of more. Really, when it comes down to any of this stuff, it's using it is what kind of teaches you.
Yeah.
If you never use it, well, you'll never learn.
But
Yeah.
this was the stuff mainly for me that I wanted, you know,
Yeah.
how to handle the mics and get the decent sound out of each individual and things like
Yeah.
I
that.
mean, the only thing I got going for me is I had experience, a little bit of experience on a roll on BS 2480. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
I got to play with that for a few years.
Sure.
And I still was only just a
Well, they were
minute.
They were a very sophisticated unit, had a lot of stuff built into them, and they took a lot of manual reading to figure those babies out. Yeah.
And believe me,
This is-
it's not even close to know
Yeah.
a lot of it.
Yeah, this board, I mean, for a lot of years when I sold sound equipment to churches, I hesitated to sell people digital mixers because I felt for a lot of people it was just kind of too far over their head.
Yeah.
And so analog boards were, what I did, but there are occasions where you go to a church. I have a church, without mentioning any names, where they don't want anybody. No one knows how to use it, and they don't want to know how to use it.
All right.
So all they want me to do is come in and set it up with their worship team, get it the way we want it. So it's a digital mixer.
Yeah.
And in a digital mixer, you have a screen and you have scenes, and you can store everything as a scene.
Yeah.
And when you press a new scene, all the faders move to whatever position that you preset. So they have worship team 1, 2, 3, 4, and when worship team 1 is on, they know how to come into the board, turn it on, dial up worship team 1, and press the button, and everything goes to place, and that's it. They don't touch anything else.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's not the ideal use for a digital mixer because there's so much they could do with it, but that's what they wanted, So digital mixers have that ability. There's so many features built into them. There's a lot of things, some places have a big rack of, outside effects and EQs and compressors and things like that. All those things are built into digital mixers.
And they're